Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Today, I have a fabulous guest. Actually, all my guests are fabulous, but this guest is fabulous and provocative. So typically, if someone asked you, "Are you dense?" it would immediately put you on the emotional defensive. But my guest today, Nancy Cappello, Ph.D., wants you to think of breast defense when you hear the name of her organization. Nancy is the director and founder of Are You Dense and Are You Dense Advocacy, Inc. Both groups have a mission to educate the public about the particular risks and screening challenges of having dense breast tissue to prevent missed, delayed, and advanced stage cancer, thus reducing mortality and morbidity as well. She's the inspiration behind Connecticut's first in the nation density reporting law passed in 2009, making Connecticut a global leader in density reporting, adjunct screening, and the density reporting grassroots movement. Since then, 35 states have enacted density reporting laws, and a federal bill is pending. Dr. Cappello has presented her inspiring story of patient-turned-advocate across the United States and internationally, including to Canada, Rome, Tokyo, Paris, Puerto Rico, and Australia. Nancy's chalkboard, I love this. It's her.
I was a teacher.
It's you. Oh, okay, that's true.
I was not into breast until I was diagnosed. So I was a teacher. So I got Nancy's chalkboard.
Nancy's chalkboard. I was wondering where you came up with that title, but I love I love your subtitle where you say blogging and blabbing about breasts and anything else that I fancy. Anyway, her blog is also published by the Huffington Post, but it's available online. She's the recipient of numerous honors and awards, including being named a health hero by Parade magazine, honored by the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame, and selected for the National Americanism Award by UNICO. She holds a BA and an MS, as we just learned, in elementary and special education from Central Connecticut State University, a 6th-year degree in administration and supervision from Southern Connecticut State University, and a PhD in education administration from the University of Connecticut. When her mission is finished, and I love that she put her her bucket list at the end of her bio. I think I'm going to do that.
Oh, it's so important.
Right. So she says when she's finished with her mission, she looks forward to rescuing a dog, learning Italian, and taking golf lessons. Welcome to the ladies' room, Nancy Cappello.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Donica. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. This is such an important topic, and I know all our listeners want to hear all about it. And we do have listeners, and even our next guest is from Australia. And we also had a guest recently from France. So we have people listening from all over the world. But tell me, what is the definition of your mission being finished? Is that when all 50 states have a dense breast reporting law, or is there more?
I guess it's when I reach higher and go to Boca, because that's what my husband would like to do. I would say, I often joke about it, but it's true that I've been doing this for a long time, Donica. This is not like an overnight success by any means. I mean, it was 14 years since I was diagnosed. And, again, my mission is to standardize the communication of dense breast tissue to patients across the United States. So I'm hoping that's kind of the first indication that maybe it's time to pass the baton to somebody else. But again, I do work all over the globe, but, I can't, I'm not any younger. I have a red, white, and blue card, so you know exactly what that is.
I do, and I have one as well.
Oh, you do? Wow.
Yes. Well, I want you to know they changed the age. They now send them to people for your 50th birthday.
Oh, I could.
My 50th birthday was a long time ago.
Yes, exactly. So, again, this is hard work. I hope we can accomplish it. We have accomplished a lot, but we still have a long ways to go. Again, I am very passionate about breast cancer mortality, reducing that, and making sure that every woman, again, this is because of my background in education, has access to an earlier diagnosis, which I never did.
So when I first learned about your work, Um, Obviously, I'm a physician, I'm a women's health advocate, I'm up on these things. And I was reading your story, and I want you to share your story in a moment. But I was reading it and I was thinking, why did this have to be legislated? This is one of those things where you hit yourself in the head, and it's one of those duh moments.
Exactly.
And so maybe tell me first why it had to be legislated, and then tell us your story.
Okay. I ask the same question every day when I do this. For the last 14 years, I say, why did I ever have to go through to legislation? Because what happened was, Donica, when I was diagnosed and I found out I had dense tissue, I never even knew what it was, never heard about it. I ended up with a team of doctors now. This is just in my little Woodbury, Connecticut community. I'm not even thinking of global work, talking to Dr. Donica Moore, none of that. I was just a regular old patient trying to, make a living, work hard, exercise, eat healthy, and have my mammograms. And so when my 6 doctors tell me in a separately, I said, what happened? I have 11 years of normal mammograms. Here's my reports, look. And each of them said to me, well, Nancy, you have dense breast tissue. Well, what's that? They begin to tell me how challenging it is to see cancer on a mammogram if you have dense tissue. I say, shouldn't I know this? And they say, each of them separately, oh no, Nancy, we don't tell women that. So that was my first rejection. Right. When I had my single mastectomy, I had 3 weeks off from work. I did a literature search on dense tissue because I was not happy with the responses I was getting from my medical folks. And when I came up with study after study, again, Dr. Donica, this is in 2004. So we have tons more research. This is prior to my diagnosis. Decade of research on the masking, more than a decade of research on the risk of breast density as a risk factor. So I compile, I'm thinking I'm a teacher, again, Nancy's chalkboard, I compile packets. I bring them to my docs and I say, look at the research. There's women just like me that are going into your practices day in and day out and having mammograms that are saying normal, they're not. Shouldn't you start telling women? Second, no, Nancy, we're not going to do that. So what do I do? Just think about it. So do I just say, oh, well, what are you going to do? You win some, you lose some. I am scared still of dying from this disease. So my husband, it's a family disease. He was devastated when I was diagnosed at such a late stage, and we'll go in that further. But he said, I'm going to call a former colleague of mine. She is a senator in Connecticut, and I'm going to tell her the science you uncovered. Never mind poor Nancy, my poor wife, she's going through, treatment, surgeries, chemo. No, the research. And when he went to Senator Hartley, Joan Hartley, she said, oh my God, Nancy, oh my God, Joe, women have to have this information. We are going to do something in Connecticut. And Dr. Donica, you know this as a doctor and a healthcare provider. When I was diagnosed, when I tell you it was such a dark time in my life, I was scared. I'm still scared, but I'm better than it now because I'm so occupied with all the other work I'm doing. I was so scared, and I felt I had no hope. Stage of diagnosis in 2004 said that Nancy Cappello is going to survive. Only 49% of women who are diagnosed at stage 3C, like me, will survive 5 years. And I'm thinking, I'm going to die from this disease. And no one really seems to care. And so when I heard Joe turn to me and say, Senator Hartley's going to help us, my head dropped to my desk. I started crying. I thought, isn't this ridiculous that my health care providers are acting like they're health care less, and I have to now count on my legislators to do this? That's how it happened.
You don't hear that story every day.
No.
So tell us how old you were when you were diagnosed. And my understanding is you had your mammogram every single year. You had 11 years of normal mammograms. And then how did it come to pass that you went from your 11th mammogram to then being diagnosed with stage 3C breast cancer?
So I was premenopausal. I had just turned 51. And I had my 11th normal mammogram in November of 2003. Being such a faithful patient, early January, I had an appointment for my annual gynecological exam.
Yay.
My gynecologist, thank goodness for her hands and her feeling of this palpable, what she called a thickening in my right breast. And she said to me, Nancy, I know you just had a normal mammogram 6 weeks ago. However, because there's something that feels a little suspicious to me, I'm going to send you for another mammogram, which in 2 days I had another mammogram. Guess what? Normal. But because there was a palpable ridge, the next thing was having the ultrasound targeted only on that palpable ridge. And lo and behold, from one technologist to 3 doctors hovering over me saying, was it on the mammogram? No, it wasn't on the mammogram. Oh my God, look at her density. I'm thinking, what the heck are they even talking about? Fast forward. My cancer, Donica, think about this, had metastasized to 13 lymph nodes. A normal mammogram weeks before, 2.5 centimeter tumor, stage 3C. Estrogen positive, which I was able to take. I'm still on medication, but again, estrogen positive cancer can recur as a lifetime. So I know I'm still at risk of dying from this disease. So that's how I found out once they did the biopsy, and once I certainly had the pathology report after my single mastectomy, that I was diagnosed with stage 3C breast cancer.
So thank goodness for your gynecologist.
Absolutely.
Especially because a lot of gynecologists would appropriately say, okay, this is probably not a big deal because you just had a normal mammogram, and they would say, come back and we'll examine you again in 3 months or 6 months. So thank goodness she didn't do that.
I agree.
And it really underscores the importance of your annual GYN exam. So let me put in a little plug for that. But also it underscores the importance of your own breast self-exam.
Yes.
Because many times we hear the story that women will say, I had normal mammograms and I found a lump myself. So we hear that story quite frequently as well.
So important.
But the other thing I want to address is something you said earlier about fear and this issue of, the 5-year survival rates when you found out. So one of the things that I noticed when I was a medical student, which was about 100 years ago, and I first learned about 5-year survival rates. Now, when I was a medical student, for somebody to survive 5 years with any kind of cancer was considered a victory. And that's why we defined it as a 5-year survival rate. Plus 5 years seemed like a pretty long time to be collecting data on people. But what I realized is that by definition, 5-year survival rates per se are always at least 6 years out of date. Now, why is that? Because by the time they collect the information, by the time the statisticians analyze it, and by the time it's published, it's really like 6 years from the time that first patient was looked at. So in the meantime, we're making medical progress. In the meantime, we're learning more about diagnosis, follow-up, therapy, medications. When I was in medical school 100 years ago, we didn't talk about estrogen receptors on breast cancer. We didn't know about BRCA1 and BRCA2 abnormalities. We didn't know that we could target therapies based on somebody's individual risk factors. And in fact, my very first research project that I was ever involved in as a medical student was to see whether immediate rehab and physical therapy helped women who had had a mastectomy with postoperative lymphedema, which was really a big problem. And we've made huge advances now in how we treat patients with those circumstances. I also want to give a shout out. We interviewed a few weeks ago a young woman who if you haven't had a chance to listen to this episode of the podcast, I highly encourage it. We had a young woman named Jenny Wyckoff, who is what we're now calling a pre-viver.
Yes.
So she had tested positive for BRCA2. She was in her late 30s, and she made the tough decision that Angelina Jolie made to go full out Rambo preventive prophylactic. So she just had her prophylactic mastectomy yesterday, and I have heard she's doing great. So I want to give her a shout out because I know she's listening. But she is so brave, and she came and talked to us, and it was so painful. But one of the things I said to her, her role model was her grandmother, who had had breast cancer in her 60s and lived to be 96. And she said the first thing she thought of was, this is what I'm going to die of.
Yeah.
And I said, what made you go there when your own grandmother had breast cancer and lived to be 96? Now, maybe she died at 96 of breast cancer, but most of us would probably take those odds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with is an overwhelmingly scary scary situation. And you approached it in a great way, you know, as far as being an educator, certainly, by saying, okay, knowledge is power. I want to arm myself with as much information as possible. And I'm thinking 2004, we had the internet by then.
Yes.
And you could do internet
And
research.
electric typewriters, I think we're outdated.
I had one of those. I got
I
through
did
medical
too.
school with that. Absolutely. So tell me, what you went through, obviously your own treatment and your own recovery. How much after your surgery were you by the time you started campaigning for the first easy for me to say, breast density bill?
Well, I honestly, when I found out from my 6 doctors that I had this condition called dense breast tissue, which prevented my mammogram of seeing my cancer, and I went to the literature and I found out 40% of women have dense tissue. There's other tools such at the time, MRI and ultrasound, that can find cancers that mammogram miss. We're talking invasive cancers, and that it's also a risk factor. So it was right out of the gate because I was not satisfied. Again, I look at my career as an educator, and I worked with kids with disabilities, always trying to give them equal access to a quality education. And I couldn't get equal access to an earlier diagnosis when I never missed an appointment. Dr. Donica, think of this. I felt betrayed. I followed every rule, exercise, eat healthy. I read Oprah. You think I would know? I mean, I did everything I should do to be educated, and yet there was this piece of information that actually was in my report for 11 years, hidden in my health file that I never got until finally, until I was diagnosed. I got all my health records that was hidden from me, the patient. My doctors knew, but I didn't know, the one who had it. And so right out of the gate, after Joe talked to Senator Hartley, she said to us, we're going to do something. And that was in 2004. The following year, we passed an insurance coverage bill for ultrasound as an adjunct to screening for women with dense tissue. And I figured, great, now doctors are going to start doing ultrasound as a screening. Something's wrong with me. I thought that was going to happen. It never happened. Doctors were even when women were getting scripts from their gynecologist typically, or primary care physician, arm wrestling for a script for an ultrasound if they had dense tissue. I said to them, ask if you have dense tissue. It should be in your report somewhere. Once they got the script, they're going to these imaging facilities in my community, and guess what the imaging facilities were saying? Oh, we don't do ultrasound as a screening. No, we don't do that. We don't do it as a screening. We only do ultrasound when there's a palpable something, and we concentrate in that area. So fast forward, went back to the legislature and said, basically the bill is worthless. I didn't have RU Dense. I didn't have a nonprofit. I was working at the State Department as head of special education for the state. I went back and said, we have to get this to the patient, because I know when women get this information, they're going to be the loudest voice. They're going to be the loudest voice in the room, and they're going to get what they need for personalized screening. So
that's what we have to do with all of these things. We have to speak up and demand what we need. And unfortunately, we're in the state of things in our country with healthcare where mandating insurance coverage is an extremely important part of getting the healthcare that we need, because very often not having the insurance coverage is a barrier. So the good news is the Affordable Care Act mandated mammographic screening and ultrasound screening to be covered with no copays, no deductibles, no co-insurance for screening. Now, what I hear from a lot of patients are very surprised when they get their bills when they've had a mammogram, and they say, well, I thought this was supposed to be covered, but it was indicated as a diagnostic.
Yeah. I never thought I'd get into the weeds about coding. You probably know about that. But, for ultrasound, there's no screening code per se. So it has a lot to do with how it's coded. What are you using for the code? So I always tell my friends and folks that contact me constantly, this is the coding that we seem to have the best result of getting your ultrasound covered, but still there's a lot of.
What is the code? Just tell everybody.
Oh, I don't have it off the top of my head. It's 7 numbers, but I can.
All right. Well, you'll have to post it on my Facebook page when we post the video. But this is the kind of information that women share.
Exactly.
Where do you get this kind of therapy? What's the diagnostic code that is going to allow your insurance company to cover it? And this is the kind of information that women have been sharing with each other all along. So aside from your major mission tip, which is knowledge is power and empower yourself by becoming educated, what tips would you give for women first for the 40%, so the 4 out of 10 women who have dense breast tissue? Number one, obviously you have to know.
Yes, of course. You need to know. You need to ask your doctor. Even though we have 35 states now that mandate the reporting, it's 5 sentences. It could be in the last paragraph. It could be in the next page. I know you're busy. I'm busy. Women are busy. I read the first paragraph. I'm not going to go and read 20 paragraphs to find out that I have dense tissue. Ask your doctors. And if you do have dense tissue, even if you're getting the 3D mammogram, which is a better mammogram, however, it's still challenging it's still a challenge in the dense breast. Talk about adjunct screening, added screening to your mammogram. Start with 3D if you can get it. I'm still a consumer of mammography. I still have one good breast, so I get my 3D. 6 months later, I have my ultrasound, and then yearly I have an MRI, and then every 6 months I have an ultrasound.
So talk about the MRI victory. The American College of Radiology. There is an ACR, which is rheumatology. The American College of Radiology recently changed their screening guidelines to include an annual MRI for women who had a personal history of breast cancer who had dense breasts.
Exactly. So it just came out in March, and recommendations for higher than average risk. We know MRI is going to be certainly the most sensitive tool. That's why I can still get it, because it's important for me. And if I get breast cancer or recurrence, I want it to be found early, of course. So they're recommending MRI for women who have dense tissue plus a personal history or a family history. And they're also saying that for women who only have dense tissue and no other risk factors like me, you may want to consider the ultrasound, knowing the benefits and risks. We should know the benefits and risk of all our technologies. Even MRI, you still have the gadolinium, you still have the injection. You have to really weigh it out. And for me, it's important. It's more important for me because of my history to find my cancer early.
Well, the only risks that I can think of ultrasound are the inconvenience and the cost, but also, the risk of what we call a false positive.
Yes.
So a false positive, and I'm sure lots of women who are listening to this have been in this experience, either with our mammograms or also with pap smears.
Yes.
False positive is, there's something, we see something, we're not really sure what it is. We want you to come back. And many times they'll say, we want you to come back for another ultrasound or another mammogram. But many times they'll just say, we want you to go to biopsy.
Right.
And a biopsy, of course, is invasive and painful and scary. And then you have to wait for the results. Right. And a biopsy, we often think of a biopsy as 100% accurate, because if you get the tissue and you're looking at it under a microscope, which is the whole point of a biopsy, you can actually see if there are cancerous cells. But we know many times the hard part of the biopsy is getting the needle exactly in the right place. Sometimes we miss, and sometimes we don't get the area, or sometimes the suspicious area that we saw on the ultrasound is not the cancer and it's somewhere else, or even sometimes in the opposite breast. So as far as I'm concerned, those are the only downsides of ultrasound.
Yes.
Do you think of any other downsides?
There's no radiation.
Mm-hmm.
It's relatively, quote unquote, inexpensive if you're going to pay out of pocket. And you can I will tell women this: if your insurance company is not paying for your ultrasound, shop around. Mm-hmm. It's better to go to an imaging facility than a hospital, because the hospitals tag on their hospital costs. You can actually negotiate, believe it or not. I know it takes time to do that, but if you're worried about the money that you're spending, that's one way to shop around for, and make sure that whoever is doing it has experience doing screening ultrasound. Going back to the false positives. We've put that claim to bed, because there's been we did our own survey back in, I think it was 2012. We interviewed women, about 1,000 women across the country, and asked them, would you rather have a false positive than a missed positive? Women would rather find cancer at its earliest stage than have a call back or something that looks suspicious, a lot of women will say, my doctor said come back in 6 months. I want to come back like in 2 days.
Right.
I don't want to wait 6 months. I'm worried. So to alleviate
the reason we say come back in 6 months is not because we don't want to see you for 6 months, but because we want to see if anything changes.
Exactly.
So, I don't know if everybody has seen their mammogram, and I wish I could hold up a picture. But I want to be very clear about what happens when you have breast density or increasing breast density or abnormal breast density. When you're looking at a mammogram, what you're looking at, and you know this, but I'm explaining it to everybody, is you're looking at varying shades of gray. And these are all pixelated on the screen. And the human eye can only see or differentiate about 700 shades of gray. And yet there probably are over 4,000 shades of gray actually in there. And different tissues show up differently based on their density. Dense breast tissue makes your mammogram look completely white. And so we say it's like looking for a snowflake in a snowstorm. So it's not a question of the radiologist having missed it.
No.
They just can't see it. And I'll give the analogy. We had a horrible snowstorm here just a few weeks ago, and stupid me decided I should drive home anyway. And it was a complete whiteout situation. It was that kind of blizzard where I just couldn't see anything through the windshield. And yes, I did pull over and I got a hotel, but that's another story. So that's kind of what a mammogram looks like with somebody who has dense breasts. And of course, we didn't get into the fact that there's varying degrees of breast density. Some women, the whole breast looks completely white. In some women, it's 50% or 30%. So I forgot, what percentage does it have to be to kick in the notification?
Well, there's four categories of breast density, and it's called the BI-RADS. It's from the American College of Radiology. It's A, B, C, and D. And typically in the literature, if you have a BI-RADS C or a D, you are considered having dense breast tissue. However, in the new BI-RADS revision in 2015, there was a provision that was stated that if there's an area of dense tissue, even if you have like scattered breasts, but there's an area of density that you're still concerned about whether there's something could be masked or hidden, then you can still call the woman having dense breast tissue.
Got it. Okay. So what's next on the horizon? What states are we supposed to be lobbying right now? And what's the status of the federal legislation? That's very exciting.
Let me go to the states. So this year, we, in 2018, we had 4 states that already, heard the bills, governors signed the bills, and this was in Washington State, Florida, Utah, and Wisconsin.
Oh, did Florida sign already? I thought we were still waiting.
Yes, but Florida, we've been working on Florida's legislation for about 8 years.
Wow. So and Rick Scott signed it.
Yes, he did. I was down in Tallahassee about a month ago with one of the leading patient advocates, meeting with legislators. We had these 2 women, fierce women, who introduced the bill, legislators, and we finally got enough traction. I think some of it is, certainly much of it is because these ladies really wanted it. They wanted it done and they worked it. The other thing is we've accumulated so many states now. I think it's hard to convince. We still have opposition, Dr. Donica, and really the fiercest opposition is really the physician trade organizations. It's not the insurance.
Really?
Yes. Isn't that?
Wow. And what is the basis for their opposite? They just don't want to do the extra paperwork?
I think
it's a lot of paperwork.
Well, I think the first thing is what you said to me when we started this, and I get it. Why do we have to legislate it? No kidding, docs. I don't want to do this. I mean, again, I should be rescuing a dog, but I'm doing this. Here's the point. If you don't want to legislate it, which I didn't want to do, why wouldn't a physician trade organization like the American College of Radiology come out with a letter to their members and say, listen, while we don't like these mandated laws, let's voluntarily decide as a group all women should have this information. So even if they're in the 15 states that do not have laws right now, why wouldn't a doctor disclose this information? This is critical.
And I assume you've talked to people from the American College of Radiology and
Oh,
asked them
yes.
this.
I've gotten letters, love letters. Well, they weren't really love letters, but yeah, I have gotten letters. Yes. So no, it's
And
not.
what's their objection?
One of them is that mammography, I think when we first started this work, that we are the one, RU Dent and RU Dent's Advocacy in our work in Connecticut that really illuminated the information about dense tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was in the literature, it was never in the examining room for the most part. There were some pioneering doctors that were doing it and telling patients, but for the most part, women didn't know this information. And so I think when we first came out, and again, I called exposing the best kept secret, and I always said from the get-go, right out of the gate, I realize I have a PhD. I know I'm not a real doctor. I get that. And I don't want to be. So I would always say, mammogram first. However, if you have dense tissue, and I think what happened in the very beginning, doctors were fearful, and there's no evidence to prove that this has happened, that women will not go for mammograms now because they're concerned about their dense tissue and they're going to ask for other tools, even though mammogram is the standard of care. So
right, and you're talking about something in addition,
exactly,
not instead of. Exactly. So you would think they would be so motivated because they're going to have increased billing codes.
Yes, exactly. And you're going to have people that are going to love you, especially if you find their cancer, and they're going to bring their kids and their parents and their grandparents. If they need an extra imaging, they're coming to you. If you found that cancer that might be invisible on the mammogram. The other thing is that we get a lot of, and this is from male and female physicians, that we're going to scare women if we tell them that they have dense tissue.
That drives me insane.
Insanity. That is offensive to me as a woman, and as a woman who has had late stage breast cancer, because I wasn't told this, and it's outrageous. The other thing is that the randomized controlled trials of mammography. Mammography is the only technology, and it's actually analog. It's not 2D nor 3D. It's the only technology that's had randomized controlled trials that have shown a reduction in mortality from using the technology. And so they will say, we haven't had a randomized controlled trial about ultrasound. We haven't had a randomized controlled trial about MRI either, but we're using it because we know as a surrogate. Again, I used to say, I don't care if you're finding it through a mammogram, a Ouija board. I mean, just find the darn thing.
Well, and that's the issue, is that you don't really need a randomized controlled trial for ultrasound or MRI, because nobody is suggesting to do it instead of mammogram. It's in addition to mammogram. And nobody is suggesting that mammogram is perfect or that mammography is perfect.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm very concerned about is this issue of ongoing surveillance for women who have either had breast cancer in the past, or women who've had very, very, very small abnormalities, what we would call stage 0, or DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ, which has the C word in it. But we're kind of debating, is this really cancer? Is this not cancer? And it would be so great if we could just follow women with diagnostic testing. But mammography is not perfect yet. So there are other things in development, which is awesome and exciting, but we're not ready for prime time yet.
Wow.
So until then, we have to use what tools are the best things that we have at our disposal.
I think early on, again, 14 years, it's a long time. 14 years ago, when I first uncovered this, and I brought the fact out that mammogram wasn't perfect, there weren't a lot of doctors saying that. They were saying, if you want early detection, get your mammogram, get your mammogram, get your mammogram. Yeah, but for a subset of women who may have this hidden intruder, they may need more than a mammogram. And so it's so frustrating. And again, we still have 40,000 women, as you know, that die from this disease. And I've worked with women all across this country who found me through a Google search after they were diagnosed, after they had a late stage disease, after they never missed a mammogram. Most of these women are highly educated, didn't know about dense tissue, and sent me an email and said, Nancy, I want to do what you did in my state. And they end up, some of these women, I have 12 women who died from disease, late stage disease. From the randomized controlled trial of mammography, those trials that reduced advanced disease reduced mortality.
Absolutely.
So that's why this is.
I also have this sneaking suspicion that when women are fighting back and they're becoming advocates, I think it gives them this extra strength. And I think that's, very empowering and very healing. You mentioned earlier that there are doctors who don't want to say anything negative about mammography ever. And part of that comes from a good place. Part of that is either their experience or their own fear that if women hear anything, that mammography is anything less than perfect, then they won't go.
Right.
And nothing in medicine is perfect.
No.
However, it's the best we have right now. I can't think of any other test which has 100% accuracy. Not even a pregnancy test has 100% accuracy. So, we do what we can. I hear this all the time with vaccines, where even the flu vaccine, where people were outraged this year that the flu vaccine was not 100% effective. Well, it's never 100% effective. This year, it was pretty low, but it's still the best game in town.
So that's why when I found out about this and doctors would say to me, well, once we tell them they have dense tissue, what do you want me to say, Nancy? And I say, I want you to tell them that the impact of dense tissue could mask, not all, 50% of cancers are seen on mammogram with dense tissue, but 50 are missed. So the point is, you could have certainly you have to just be more diligent. Like you said, be breast aware. When you go to, having a thorough clinical exam by somebody who knows how to do them is
and a breast self-exam.
Exactly. So having those things, and then talking to your docs possibly about added screening, depending on your risk. Now, again, if you are high risk, you have a 20% lifetime risk of breast cancer, there's a likelihood that your insurance will cover MRI because of that percentage.
Absolutely. So now tell us about the federal legislation and tell us what the status is, tell us who's sponsoring it, and tell us which of our legislators we have to call and harass as soon as we finish this podcast.
Well, actually, this is our probably fourth reiteration of our breast density federal bill. And we had one introduced, the first time was introduced in like 2010 or 11. We finally got both Congress, House and the Senate to introduce a bill back in 2015-16. So we have a bill right now, and every 2 years when there's a new Congress, we have to start all over again. So Senator Dianne Feinstein is the sponsor in the Senate. Senator Heller in Nevada is the Republican in the Senate. And then we have in the House, we have my Congresswoman, Rosa DeLauro.
Oh, and Rosa, of course, is an ovarian cancer survivor.
Exactly. And she's, they've been fabulous. The legislature
has been a champion of women's health I think I've known her since the late 1980s. Really? Wow. Well, in fact, there was a mammography bill, and I'm not going to get the details of this right, but there was a mammography bill that was facing Congress in like 1989, 1990-ish. And at the time, there were only 11 women in Congress.
Wow.
And so to raise awareness for this bill, all 11 of those women decided to have their own mammograms and make the results publicly known. And lo and behold, one of the women who was a congresswoman from Tennessee, Congresswoman Lloyd, actually was diagnosed with breast cancer just from having that random mammogram to make a point.
That made a point, I bet, huh? Yeah.
It made a big point, and they certainly weren't planning to have that extra media coverage, but it doesn't hurt. And I think
go ahead.
Sorry.
I just wanted to mention that.
I didn't hear you.
I just wanted to mention that Representative Fitzpatrick is also from Pennsylvania, is also on the he's on the Republican side on our bill in the House. So that's why I just wanted to mention his name, because
that's great.
But the thing is, we need more support. We need more support in both the Senate and the House, having legislators sign on. On our website, rudenseadvocacy.org, you can hit on our website. You can hit on federal bill. You can put your zip code in, and you can contact your representative and your senator within like 3 minutes and write a letter to ask for that support. So, so it's easy. It's not like you have to start your own little email train and figure out how to do it. But if you go on our website, you can do a direct mailing right to your representatives.
Now, here's an interesting question. I don't know if you know this. I just thought of this. I wonder how many of our federal legislators themselves, women in Congress and women in the Senate, are breast cancer survivors. I can think of 2 off the top of my head. certainly Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been
Yes,
very,
Debbie
from
was here.
Florida, has been very
Yeah.
public about it. And Claire McCaskill
Yes,
was
Claire recently, yeah.
recently diagnosed and treated. Can you think of anybody else?
I can't offhand, although I do know that there's, of course, wives of some of the male senators, of course, or daughters or sisters or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't
I mean,
be a
no,
reason that we
no.
champion this, because 250,000 women a year are diagnosed in the United States with breast cancer. I was actually talking to an advocacy organization that does emergency relief in places that have a high number of refugees. And he was talking about their work in Afghanistan, and to impress upon me just how weak the medical infrastructure is in Afghanistan. He was talking about just how they have an extraordinary number of women who die of breast cancer because they don't have any screening protocols in place, and they don't have access to mammogram. And I think we almost take it for granted a little bit in this country. Actually have a friend who runs a company. She's got great insurance, and she has not gone for her mammogram ever.
Yeah.
And she's way past the age where she should be going.
Right.
Because if I have it, I just don't want to know. And I have no argument against that, except to slap her around and just mention it
Well,
every
I often say that, I really never thought deep and long about going for my mammogram. I went because my mother went, and so did my aunt. So
Good
they
for
were
her.
like role models. So I went. So I just went for my yearly mammogram. And I only went because in the unlikely event that I was going to get breast cancer, this was in my head,
Mhm.
it would be found early.
Mhm.
So hence the reason why I was so outraged when I found out, maybe not, depending on your
Absolutely.
perspective. I do want to mention the FDA and the MQSA.
Yes.
So we're also working, there is a federal regulation called the Mammography Quality Standards Act, the MQSA, that was enacted in 1992 by Congress to regulate mammograms, to regulate the reporting of results, that there's a regulation that within 30 days of a woman's mammogram exam, she needs to get the results of her test sent to her, delivered to her, and other things about radiation and different types of, rules surrounding the technology. So when I first read about the MQSA, I thought, why can't we just go to the FDA? Again, I'm thinking of that dog, Dr. Donica, just so you know. Why can't we just go to the FDA and say, listen, I'll give you 3 sentences. Let's put 3 sentences in the regulations. We'll get them passed, and we'll have everybody in the country will now know that what their breast tissue composition is. Again, I want women, whether they're fatty or dense, I want them to be able to monitor their own tissue composition. And then we'll go on our merry way, and then I can, again, retire and go to Boca. So anyway.
With a dog.
With a dog.
Just think of it this way. Look how many women you're rescuing
my
who
God.
have dogs, who are able to take care of their dogs because of the work that you're doing. And I just want to, you mentioned the opposite of dense breasts being fatty breasts. For many women, that's the F word. And they don't want to hear about anything fatty. But in this case, fatty is good.
Fatty's great, exactly. It's a good fat. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Like olive oil, it's a good fat. And so in 2011, we testified. We went down. We had a hearing in front of the MQSA committee of the FDA. The FDA regulates it. And we had doctors and other advocates, and we said, we really think this is important. We had some research, of course, more research than we had in 2004. And at the end of the day, they decided, after some drama, that they were going to recommend that there would be changes in the regulations to include a patient's breast tissue composition in her lay report and be part of the report. Beautiful. Awesome. Guess what happened since 2011?
Nothing.
Help! That's why we do state by state, like Noah's Ark, 2 by 2. But so I went back there in 2016. They had another hearing. It was like deja vu all over again. It was like Groundhog Day. This is the same thing we talked about 6 years ago. But there is some light, because the new commissioner, Commissioner Gottlieb,
who's wonderful.
If you ever see him, just give.
He's also adorable.
He's really. Oh, I like adorable. That's good. He has a blog now, and it looks as if the FDA is being more patient friendly and patient communication. And he has a blog, and they also have goals for 2018. And one of the goals is to ensure that women who have dense tissue, that it's part of their mammography reporting results. So we have a newly renewed sense of possibility that even though we have a federal law bill being discussed, but we believe that the FDA may be able to do something for women across this country sooner than we would have a federal law, and making sure it's standardized across the states. So hopefully
that would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great. So what's your call to action?
So my call to women.
Well,
a couple of things. So I always believe that women should, as far as health, should do as much as they can to stay healthy. So even though we know that sometimes there's just bad darn luck that happens, but we know that probably 80% of our ailments or our disease could be helped if we took exercise, find something you like or you love that's doable. Mm-hmm. I mean, I spend not a lot of time, but every day I'm on the treadmill for maybe 25 minutes. It works for me, and I can do it morning or night depending on my schedule. But you have to find something that you can do, and you'll do it. And then eat healthy. So those things, I would say, take control of your health first. And I will tell you this, Dr. Donica, when you say call to action, I had more doctors say to me, Nancy, I had challenging chemotherapy. If I had 6 surgeries, I'm still on medication, but doctors would say to me, you are, despite having cancer, you are in great shape and great health. And you know what? I was never hospitalized for other than having, my surgery, but because I've had some complications. So I believe that what I did prior, even though the late stage disease hit me like a ton of bricks, what I did prior helped me in my recovery. And it's continuing help me, even from recurrence. It's so important. So that's the first call of action.
Yeah, I will tell you, I met, speaking of adorable men, I met Bob Harper a few months ago, just about 7 or 8 weeks after his heart attack. He's the trainer.
Oh, yes.
And we were discussing this issue of how he felt criticized by people for saying, how could you have a heart attack? You do everything right. You eat right. You eat, you exercise, and you're telling us always to do these things to prevent heart disease, and yet you had a heart attack. And he said, because I do all these other things is why I survived having a heart attack.
I absolutely believe that. It's really important. Again, I would say to women, if you are choosing to have a mammogram, if you're worried about your breast health or want to make sure that you're protecting, you have some screening, then get a mammogram, look for 3D if you can. And if you have dense tissue, again, talk to your docs about personalized screening. It's a narrowly focused issue that I've gotten myself involved in, but it's really important because, again, we know the earlier the better as far as outcomes, even treatment. I chose a mastectomy because my cancer was large. I was worried about the margins. Plus, I had a couple other spots the MRI found suspicious lesions, and I didn't want to go through biopsies. And they only took one breast. So as I said, I still have the other one. So I'm still a consumer mammography, but you want to make sure.
One is better than nothing.
Yeah, it is. I always call my good breast my bad breast. But so it's important, again, to stay healthy. Live in the now if you can. I try that. I did mention to you, of course, I am concerned that they could still kill me, but I really try to, as much as I can, live in the now. I am very blessed. When I was going through treatment, I had a wonderful doctor who put us all in the same room together. So I had people with lung cancer, breast cancer, liver cancer. Wow. And I sat there with my stage 3C with other people who were metastatic, who were worse than I was. And we sat there and we talked about everything but our cancer. We were talking about our families and who's going here and who's having this and who's having that. We're talking about recipes. It was such a healing for me. And I said to myself, after my first chemotherapy treatment, slap yourself silly, Cappello. What's wrong with you? You are so blessed. I had great insurance. I have a great husband. I have a great family. I opportunities to choose who I'm going to talk to and how I'm going to find second opinions. So count my blessings every day, and that's exactly what I do. And
I think that's the best advice that we really could give anybody. Before we unfortunately we have to wrap this up, but before we go, I want you to tell everybody where they can find you.
Sure.
Online and on social media?
Yeah, please. Like us on Facebook. We're on Facebook. Are You Dense? We're on Are You Dense Advocacy. We are also, our website is areyoudense.org or areyoudenseadvocacy.org. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Nancy Cappello. Again, it's really an honor. I was at an event last night and I had women coming in Connecticut and I had women coming over to me and say, you're the face behind this. You're the reason why my cancer was diagnosed. And when I hear that, as much as this is a slog to the finish line, and at times, I have fundraisers, trying to raise money, trying to get this work done, it is such an honor when I tell you, when I know that even though my voice, I felt, as you mentioned, I felt my voice was just lost. And using my loud voice now to help others find an earlier diagnosis is really just a joy, honestly.
That is great. Anyway,
can I do one thing before we leave?
Oh, absolutely.
I want to put lipstick on in the ladies' room because it's true. Dr. Donica, isn't it true when you go to the ladies' room, what are you doing? You're like this. Okay, get out of my way. Get out of my mirror.
So
Has anyone ever done that?
I have this great cartoon that was in response to, the very discriminatory, awful transgender bathroom bills. And it showed a group of 4 women at the mirror putting on lipstick, and the caption says, in case you wanted to know what transgender women do in the ladies' room. And I always say hashtag we have stalls. But that's a great lead into the final question that I wanted to ask you before we go. I often ask this at the beginning, but I ask all our guests, and everybody loves these stories. Tell me about the most unique, memorable, or interesting experience you ever had or interaction you ever had in a public ladies' room.
A ladies' room, not men's room. Okay.
Well, actually, a lot of women have said, well, there was that time I thought I was in the ladies' room.
Well, I was in the ladies' room once at work, and I had a friend. Her name was Nancy. She was my colleague, and we kind of looked a little bit alike. I always say, but she was older than me. But she has a Ph.D. too, so she was Dr. Stark, and I'm Dr. Cappello, and I'm in the ladies' room one day, and she has a child. She had children. I never had children, and we're in the ladies' room one day, and I'm seeing there's a woman next to me. She goes, "Oh, Dr. Nancy, how's your daughter doing?" I thought, I don't want to go through. I said, "Oh, she's doing wonderful. How's she doing in college?" I just made it up. I thought, and I said to Nancy, they think you're me, but I wasn't paying the college bills. But that was one time I remember. I'm thinking I'm pretending to be somebody else. But
that's great. Well, if you can't pretend to be someone else in the ladies' room, where else can you pretend to be?
Exactly.
So anyway, I hope this will now be your most officially most enjoyable experience, a memorable experience in the ladies' room. And thank you on behalf of everybody who's listening. Thank you not only for sharing your time with us, but for the incredible, incredible advocacy work that you do, which has helped women literally all over the world.
Well, thank you. Dr. Donica, my 91-year-old mother is always thrilled when I tell her that I'm being interviewed, Ma, by a real doctor. So she always thought when I had my PhD, I could write a prescription for us, and I can't do that. So I said, Mom, I'm being interviewed by a real doctor. Phenomenal woman by the name of, Dr. Donica Moore. So I just want you to know that.
Well, now at least I know one person will be listening.
You will too.
But you are a real doctor because as an educator, the word doctor comes from the Latin root, which means teacher.
I am a teacher.
And that is what a doctor is supposed to do at all levels. So you are a real doctor. So I never want to hear that.
All right.
You're just not a medical doctor.
A real doctor with one fake breast. How's that?
Take care, and thank you so much for joining us in the ladies' room.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.